The fluorescent lights of the convenience store buzzed overhead as Emma Clarke counted the crumpled bills in her hand for the third time. $10.47. That was everything she had until Friday's paycheck, and Friday was still 4 days away. She stood in the pharmacy aisle, staring at the children's fever reducer that cost $12. Her 7-year-old brother Danny had been burning up all night, and the free clinic wouldn't see them until tomorrow afternoon. Emma closed her eyes and did the mathematics of survival that had become her constant companion. If she bought the medicine, they wouldn't eat tomorrow. If she didn't buy it, Danny's fever might get worse, might require an emergency room visit they absolutely couldn't afford. The walls of the store seemed to close in around her. Other shoppers passed by, their carts full of things Emma could only dream about. Fresh fruit, name-brand cereals, cleaning products that actually worked. She'd become expert at making herself invisible in places like this, at not meeting anyone's eyes, at moving through the world like a ghost nobody noticed. The decision made itself. She grabbed the cheaper store-brand version, $9.99, and walked toward the register with her shoulders squared against the weight of another impossible choice. Outside the grimy windows, the November rain had started again, turning the parking lot into a maze of puddles that reflected the neon signs. The weather matched her mood perfectly. Cold, gray, relentless. Emma paid for the medicine and stepped outside, tucking the small bottle into her jacket pocket like a treasure. The cold hit her immediately, and she pulled her thin coat tighter, the fabric worn so thin in places she could almost see through it. That was when she saw him. A large man in a worn leather jacket sitting on the curb near the gas pumps, his motorcycle parked nearby. Even in the rain, she could see he was shaking, his whole body trembling in a way that Emma recognized from her own worst nights. She should have walked past. She should have gone straight to the bus stop 3 blocks away, should have gotten home to Danny. Every practical bone in her body screamed at her to keep moving, to protect the little she had. Instead, Emma found her feet carrying her back toward the store entrance, her heart pounding with a decision she didn't fully understand yet. The teenager at the register looked annoyed when she asked to return the medicine. Store policy was no returns on medications, he said, barely looking up from his phone. Emma's voice shook as she explained about her brother, about the mistake, about needing the money back. Something in her desperation must have reached him, because he sighed, called the manager, and 5 minutes of tense negotiation later, Emma had her $10 back. She walked back outside, the rain soaking through her inadequate jacket, and approached the stranger. He hadn't moved from his position on the curb, still hunched over his knees, still shaking. Up close, Emma could see the deep lines in his face, the gray threading through his beard, the calluses on his hands. He looked like someone who'd worked hard his whole life and had nothing to show for it, a feeling Emma understood in her bones. Without a word, she extended the bill toward him. The man looked up slowly, his weathered face and gray beard wet from rain. His eyes, pale blue and haunted, widened in surprise. For a long moment, neither moved. The rain fell steadily around them, creating a curtain that separated this moment from the rest of the world. Then he took the money with trembling hands, and Emma saw his eyes glisten with something that might have been tears mixing with the rain. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but Emma turned to leave before he could say anything, before he could see her own tears, already wondering how she'd explain the missing medicine to Danny, already calculating how many shifts she'd need to pick up to make this right. The bus ride home seemed endless, each stop a reminder of the choice Emma had just made. She pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched the city slide past. Pawn shops with barred windows, laundromats where tired people folded clothes at midnight, churches with faded signs offering hope she'd stopped believing in years ago, apartment buildings with windows that glowed yellow in the gathering darkness like distant stars. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the vibration making her jump. A text from Mrs. Chen next door, who watched Danny after school out of kindness Emma could never properly repay. The fever was getting worse, and Danny was asking for her, crying and confused. Emma's chest tightened until she couldn't breathe properly, and she had to force herself to take slow, deliberate breaths to keep the panic at bay. She'd made the wrong choice. She'd let sentiment override sense, had prioritized a stranger over her own brother, and now Danny would suffer for her foolish compassion. The guilt sat heavy in her stomach like a stone as she climbed off the bus 3 blocks from their apartment. The rain had turned into a cold drizzle that seemed to seep into everything: her clothes, her skin, her bones. Emma walked quickly despite her exhaustion, her thin sneakers splashing through puddles that soaked through the worn soles. Already rehearsing what she'd tell Danny, already calculating how many extra shifts she could pick up this week, already wondering if she could borrow money from Sandra at work. At home, Danny lay on their pull-out couch, his small body curled under every blanket they owned, his face flushed bright red with fever. Emma gathered him into her arms, feeling how hot his skin was, how small and fragile he seemed. Mrs. Chen watched from the doorway with worried eyes, offering to stay, but Emma thanked her and sent her home. This was Emma's responsibility, her burden to bear alone. She stayed awake all night, sitting vigil beside Danny's makeshift bed. Every hour she filled their one pot with cold water from the tap. They'd been boiling water for drinking since the lead contamination notice 6 months ago, but cold water was fine for compresses. She used dish towels and even her own t-shirts to make cold compresses, laying them gently on Danny's forehead and changing them when they grew warm from his fever. In the darkest hours before dawn, when the street outside was finally quiet and even the distant traffic sounds had faded, Danny's fever spiked dangerously high. He woke crying, disoriented, and calling for their mother, the woman who disappeared 3 years ago without explanation, without goodbye, without any indication she'd ever cared about the children she was abandoning. Emma held him close, speaking softly, telling him stories about their father, about better times, about a future where things would be easier. Her own heart was breaking at his confusion, at his suffering, at her inability to protect him from everything painful in the world. His fever finally broke around 5 in the morning, the crisis passing as mysteriously as it had arrived. Danny fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, his breathing evening out, his face returning to its normal color. Emma's own exhaustion hit her then, like a physical force, a wave so powerful she could barely keep her eyes open. But she couldn't sleep. She had to be at work in 3 hours, and missing a shift meant missing rent money they couldn't afford to lose. She made instant coffee with lukewarm tap water, the bitter taste barely registering as she forced it down for the caffeine. Standing by their single window, Emma watched the city wake up. Early morning joggers, delivery trucks making their rounds, the world continuing its relentless forward motion regardless of individual struggles or sleepless nights. Her shift at the diner began at 8, and Emma moved through the morning on autopilot, her body going through familiar motions while her mind stayed home with Danny. The smell of bacon grease and cheap coffee, the clash of plates being stacked, the constant demands of hungry customers, it all felt distant, as if she were experiencing it from underwater. She served coffee to truck drivers with calloused hands and construction workers with paint-stained clothes, forcing smiles she didn't feel, making small talk that required effort she barely had. By noon, she'd made $23 in tips, each crumpled bill counted and recounted with shaking hands. It was enough for medicine and maybe some rice, enough to fix yesterday's mistake. The relief was physical, a loosening in her chest that had been tight since the moment she'd handed that $10 bill to a stranger. Emma was counting the wrinkled bills in her apron pocket, already planning her route to the pharmacy after her shift, when Sandra, the other waitress, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a tendency toward gossip, nudged her sharply and pointed toward the window with a look of alarm. Outside, the street looked wrong. At first, Emma couldn't process what she was seeing. There were too many motorcycles, an impossible number of them, too many people in leather jackets, too much noise and movement for a normal Wednesday afternoon. The sound of engines rumbled through the diner's walls like distant thunder, making the windows vibrate in their frames, making coffee cups rattle in their saucers. But the bikers weren't coming to the diner. Emma watched as they parked up and down the street, all heading in the same direction, toward her neighborhood. A cold feeling spread through her chest. She thought of Danny, alone with Mrs. Chen. She untied her apron and ran, ignoring her boss's protests. She had to get home. She had to make sure Danny was safe. The sound of motorcycle engines seemed to follow her through the city streets. Emma turned onto her street and stopped so abruptly she nearly fell. The entire block was lined with motorcycles, hundreds of them, parked in neat rows along both sides of the street, chrome glinting in the midday sun that had finally broken through the morning clouds. Leather-clad bikers stood in groups, talking quietly, and in the center of it all, Directly in front of her apartment building sat the largest gathering she'd ever seen outside of a parade or protest. Mrs. Chen stood on the building's front steps with Danny beside her. The boy's eyes were wide with wonder, not fear, a distinction Emma noticed immediately with relief flooding through her chest. He was holding a stuffed animal, a brown teddy bear that looked new and expensive, surrounded by bikers who seemed more protective than threatening. One of them, a massive man with arms like tree trunks, was crouched down at Danny's level, showing him something on his leather vest. Her brother was smiling, actually smiling, in a way Emma hadn't seen in months. Emma forced herself forward, her legs shaking with adrenaline and confusion. The crowd parted as she approached, creating a path through leather and denim and metal, all eyes on her. Some of the bikers nodded respectfully. Others smiled with genuine warmth. A few of the women, yes, there were women among them, Emma noticed with surprise, gave her encouraging looks that seemed to say, "You're okay, you're safe." At the center stood the stranger from last night. He looked completely different, clean, his beard neatly trimmed, his leather jacket replaced by one that was well-maintained and decorated with patches that told stories Emma couldn't read. But his eyes were the same, those pale blue, haunted eyes that had looked at her with such gratitude and disbelief in the rain. When he saw Emma, recognition and something else, respect, perhaps, or even reverence, crossed his weathered face. He spoke then, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet that fell over the gathered crowd. His name was Marcus Dalton, but people called him Ghost. He'd earned the nickname 20 years ago for reasons he didn't elaborate on, but the name fit him somehow. What she'd done last night, giving away her last money to a complete stranger, had meant more than she could possibly know, he said. His voice was rough but sincere, each word carefully chosen. Ghost explained that he'd been at his lowest point, sitting in that rain, questioning everything about his life and whether it was worth continuing. He'd been contemplating things he wasn't proud of, considering choices that couldn't be undone. Her kindness, her willingness to sacrifice for someone she didn't know, had reminded him that humanity still existed in the world, that goodness wasn't dead, that maybe there were still reasons to keep going. The raw emotion in his voice made Emma's throat tighten. When he'd returned to his clubhouse last night and told his brothers, members of a motorcycle club with chapters across 7 states, about what this young woman had done, they'd all wanted to help. Every single one of them had a story about a time when a stranger's kindness had changed their trajectory, had pulled them back from an edge they'd been teetering on. This was their way of paying forward what had been given to them. Emma looked around at the sea of faces, seeing them differently now. These weren't the dangerous criminals she'd been taught to fear. These were people who understood struggle, who'd survived their own battles and wanted to help others survive theirs. Bikers began unloading boxes from their motorcycles, groceries, cases of bottled water, blankets and linens, cleaning supplies, canned goods that could last for months. Fresh produce appeared, actual vegetables and fruit, things Emma couldn't remember the last time she'd bought. Medicine, including the children's fever reducer she'd returned, but also first aid kits and vitamins and supplies she didn't even recognize. The pile grew impossibly large on the sidewalk, and still the bikers kept bringing more. Danny had abandoned his stuffed bear and was helping a tall biker with a scarred face carry a box of cereal, his small hands gripping one side while the man supported most of the weight. Emma's brother was chattering excitedly, asking questions about the motorcycles, and the biker was answering patiently, treating Danny's curiosity with the seriousness it deserved. Ghost approached carefully. 700 bikers had ridden through the night to be here, he explained. This wasn't charity. It was reciprocity. By her actions, Emma had become part of their community. His brothers had spent the night gathering supplies, calling in favors, pooling resources. Emma tried to refuse, but Ghost's expression grew stern. Refusing would insult the brotherhood itself. Sometimes accepting help was its own kind of courage. Ghost pulled something from his pocket, Emma's $10 bill. He pressed it back into her hand. Keep it as a reminder that kindness multiplies. The apartment had never held so many people. Bikers filed in and out like a military operation, not just dropping supplies, but organizing them, stacking canned goods, folding blankets, even fixing the broken cabinet door that had hung crooked for months. A woman with silver-streaked hair introduced herself as Raven, Ghost's wife. She guided the overwhelmed Emma to sit down and explained that many of these bikers had been where Emma was now. struggling, desperate, one crisis away from losing everything. The brotherhood existed to lift each other up. Ghost appeared with 2 cups of real coffee and stood beside Emma, watching the organized chaos. He told her his story. 20 years ago, he'd been broke and alone, caring for his sick mother. A stranger at a gas station had bought him lunch. That small act had changed his perspective. When his mother recovered, he'd joined this motorcycle club and dedicated himself to paying kindness forward. Emma asked how she could ever repay this. Ghost smiled and said she already had, by giving her last $10 to a stranger in the rain. By mid-afternoon, the bikers weren't just helping Emma. They spread through the building, knocking on doors. An elderly veteran's plumbing was fixed. A single mother received groceries and school supplies. A disabled man got a wheelchair ramp installed at the building's entrance. As evening approached, someone produced guitars. Music began to flow, and the gathering became a block party. Neighbors brought down chairs. Someone started grilling, and the street transformed into a community celebration. Ghost found Emma as the sun set. The brothers would be leaving soon, but they'd left something more than supplies. A reminder that goodness existed, that strangers could become family. He pressed a card into her hand with contact information and a personal phone number. If she ever needed anything, she should call. But more importantly, when she got back on her feet, she should pay it forward. The motorcycles left as darkness fell, their engines rumbling goodbyes. Emma and Danny waved as each rider passed. Ghost and Raven were among the last to leave, and Ghost told her that when she found herself able to help someone else, she should remember this day. Emma hugged him, feeling the strength in his arms. The same arms that had been wrapped around his knees in despair just 24 hours ago. Then they were gone. The silence was profound. Emma and Danny returned to their apartment, which felt spacious despite being the same cramped studio. Danny went straight to bed, clutching his stuffed bear. Emma stood in the kitchenette, looking at the organized shelves, the fresh produce, the medicine in the cabinet. She noticed a white envelope beside the coffee maker. Inside was $500 and a note. For rent and emergencies. You're not alone anymore. The Brotherhood. Emma sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself cry. Tears of relief, of gratitude, of overwhelming emotion at being seen and helped and valued. 2 weeks passed in a blur of new routines. Emma enrolled in a GED preparation course. Danny's fever was conquered with proper medicine. Mrs. Chen continued watching Danny, but now Emma could pay her properly. The building superintendent, shamed or inspired by the biker's example, actually started making repairs. Emma found herself thinking about Ghost and his brothers, about the systematic way they'd spread kindness. She started keeping a notebook, jotting down ideas for how she might do something similar once she had resources. She began making small interventions, bringing a blanket to the homeless woman who slept in the pharmacy doorway, helping the elderly man with groceries, passing along clothes to the young mother upstairs. These weren't grand gestures, but they felt right. They felt like honoring the gift she'd been given. Change didn't happen overnight. It accumulated through consistent choice and action. One evening, Emma received a text from Raven, inviting her to a barbecue at the motorcycle club's local chapter house. Emma stared at the message, feeling both honored and terrified. She texted back a yes. The chapter house sat on the city's outskirts, a large building that might have been a warehouse. Emma and Danny arrived by bus on Saturday afternoon. Raven appeared at the entrance with a warm smile and open arms. The interior felt like a community center, pool tables and couches, walls covered with photographs, a kitchen where people prepared food. Children ran through the space, and a massive dog sprawled in a sunbeam. Ghost greeted them warmly, introducing Emma and Danny to an endless stream of people. She met veterans and teachers and nurses and mechanics, people from every walk of life, united by leather and brotherhood. During the meal, Emma sat with women who shared their stories. A domestic violence survivor, a former homeless woman, a widow who'd nearly lost her home. Each had been helped by the club, and each had found community. Ghost took Emma on a tour, showing her the supply room and explaining how they coordinated efforts. He asked about her plans, and she told him about her GED program and her notebook of ideas. Ghost said something that stayed with Emma forever. The world needed people who understood struggle, because those were the people who could help most effectively. Compassion combined with experience. That was powerful. As they prepared to leave, Danny exhausted and happy, Emma felt something shift inside her. She'd found more than help. She'd found a template for how to live. 6 months later, Emma stood in the convenience store parking lot where everything had started. She'd passed her GED with high marks and been accepted into community college's nursing program with a partial scholarship she'd worked tirelessly to secure. They'd moved to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, 2 bedrooms, working heat, windows that actually closed properly, though she still visited Mrs. Chen weekly, bringing her favorite tea and spending hours talking about everything and nothing. Tonight, Emma was here with purpose. She'd seen him 20 minutes ago while driving past. A young man, maybe early 20s, sitting against the building's wall with the particular stillness of someone who'd run out of options and energy. She'd recognized that stillness immediately, had felt it in her own body not so long ago. She'd circled the block twice, memories flooding back with such intensity she'd had to pull over and breathe through them, before finally parking her carefully saved-for-used car and gathering her courage. She approached with a grocery bag filled with sandwiches from the good deli 2 blocks over, fresh fruit, bottled water, protein bars, and a warm coffee from the shop that Ghost had introduced her to. The young man looked up as her shadow fell across him, his eyes wary in a way that broke Emma's heart because she remembered that wariness, that expectation of cruelty or indifference from a world that had stopped seeing you as human. Emma set the bag down beside him gently, as if any sudden movement might spook him, and pulled a $20 bill from her pocket, more than Ghost had received, but Emma had more to give now. She told him her story, the simple version that still carried all the weight. 6 months ago, she'd given her last money to a stranger sitting exactly where he was sitting now, and that stranger had changed her life in ways she was still discovering. Now she was paying it forward, honoring the gift she'd been given by giving to someone else who needed it. The young man's hand trembled as he took the money and food. His eyes filling with tears, he tried to blink away. His voice cracked when he asked why she would help him, what she wanted in return. Emma recognized her own voice from that rainy night in his question, that disbelief that kindness could exist without conditions or expectations. She told him the truth Ghost had told her, because someone helped her when she needed it most, and because helping others was how we stayed human in a world that often felt inhuman. She gave him one of Ghost's cards. She had a stack of them now, with permission to distribute them freely, and explained that if he needed more help, real help to get back on his feet, he should call that number. The Brotherhood was always looking for people to help, and the only requirement was being willing to pay the kindness forward when circumstances allowed. As Emma drove home, the city lights blurring past her window, she thought about circles and cycles, about how kindness multiplied through action rather than just intention. She thought about Ghost sitting in the rain contemplating ending his life, about 700 motorcycles lined up on her street, about the young man she'd just helped who would maybe, someday, help someone else. The world was full of pain and struggle. Yes, but it was also full of people trying to ease that pain, trying to lighten those struggles. Emma pulled into her apartment complex's parking lot and sat for a moment, watching Danny through their living room window doing homework at the kitchen table, safe and healthy, and full of dreams about his future. She thought about how different their lives were now compared to 6 months ago, how that single decision to give away her last $10 had created ripples that were still spreading outward in ways she couldn't fully see or measure. 1 year after that rainy November night, Emma stood at a community center podium, her hands steadier now, though her heart still raced. She was speaking at the first annual Pay It Forward gathering organized by Ghost's Motorcycle Club in partnership with local charities and community organizations. The room was filled with familiar faces and new ones, Ghost and Raven in the front row, their presence a steadying anchor. Mrs. Chen with her daughter, Sandra from the diner with her family. The young man she'd helped 6 months ago, his name was Marcus coincidentally, which had made Ghost laugh when they'd met, sat near the back, clean cut now, employed at a bike shop, volunteering his time to help organize community events. Emma told her story, leaving nothing out. The desperation, the impossible choice between medicine and food, the moment of deciding to help a stranger despite having nothing to spare. She described waking up to 700 motorcycles outside her apartment, the overwhelming generosity, the way her entire life had shifted in a single day, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves beneath her feet. But more importantly, she talked about what came after. The GED program and late-night study sessions at the library. the nursing school acceptance letter that had made her cry for an hour, the small ways she'd started helping others, which had grown into larger efforts that surprised her with their reach. She'd partnered with the motorcycle club to create a resource network for struggling families in her old neighborhood. She'd started a weekend program where nursing students provided free health screenings at the community center. She'd even convinced her former landlord, shamed by the biker's example, to improve conditions in his buildings and establish a hardship fund for tenants facing evictions. Danny sat in the audience, 8 years old now and healthy, wearing a small leather jacket that Tiny had custom-made for him, complete with a patch that read, "Future Brother." He waved at his sister, and Emma felt her heart swell with pride and love and gratitude for this life they were building together. Everything she'd accomplished this year, every achievement, every moment of progress, every person she'd been able to help, had started with that single act of kindness in the rain. As Emma finished speaking, 7 people stood up and shared their own stories of paying it forward. The ripple effect was real. Kindness multiplied. After the event, Ghost told her something he'd never mentioned. That night in the rain, he'd been contemplating ending his life. He'd lost his son to an overdose 3 months before, and grief had broken him. Emma's $10 hadn't just bought food. It had reminded him that connection still existed, that maybe the world was worth staying in. Ghost pulled something from his jacket, a leather patch bearing the club's emblem and the words, "Honorary Sister." The club had voted unanimously to make Emma an honorary member, the first non-writer to receive such recognition in 40 years. Emma accepted the patch with trembling hands, understanding it represented a commitment to continuing the cycle of compassion. As they stood in the fading light, Danny ran up with another child, both laughing. Emma watched them, thinking about the future these children would inherit. A future where kindness wasn't rare but expected, where helping strangers wasn't foolish but fundamental. Emma sat at her desk that evening, working on grant applications for the clinic. Her phone buzzed with messages, Raven sending encouragement, Marcus checking in, Sandra sharing study notes. The network was growing, connecting, strengthening. Emma looked at the leather patch on her desk. It represented not just honor, but responsibility. She was part of something larger now, something that would continue beyond her. Outside her window, the city lights glittered in the darkness. Somewhere out there, someone was counting their last few dollars. Someone was sitting in the rain, contemplating giving up. Emma couldn't help them all, but she could help some, and those she helped might help others. The cycle was infinite. The ripple was eternal. And Emma Clarke, once a poor girl with nothing but compassion to offer, had become a catalyst for change. This was just the beginning.